Hi, I'm Desi Cerna. Welcome to my video on the CAGED template chord system. You know, there are literally thousands of different types of chords and chord shapes that can be played on the fretboard. But did you know that most of these shapes can be traced back to just 5 common open chords? They are C, A, G, E, and D. C, A, G, E, D. What's that spell? CAGED. Each one of these forms can be turned into a bar chord and moved around the fretboard. Also, each form can be played as an arpeggio pattern, and these arpeggio patterns can be broken up to create all sorts of unique shapes and interesting voicings. Throughout this video, I'm going to walk you through each form, and you're going to explore all of its possibilities. When you're done, you'll be able to play any major chord anywhere in the fretboard, any shape, any voicing. This information is suitable for intermediate and advanced level guitar players. Before you begin, your playing should meet the following requirements. 1. You should already be familiar with all of the basic open chords. G, C, D, E minor, etc. 2. You should have some experience using bar chords. 3. You should have lots of experience using the chords you know to play actual songs. And 4. You should be familiar with the notes along string 6 and string 5. If you feel that your playing meets these requirements, then go grab a guitar, electric or acoustic, it doesn't matter. Make sure you're tuned up, and we'll get started. Here is the common open C chord. With this shape, the root C is under your ring finger on string 5. That's where you should begin strumming. This shape has 3 fretted notes, and there's also 2 open strings, string 1 and string 3. If you want to move this shape around the fretboard, you have to move the open strings up with the fretted notes too. If you just move up these 3 fingers, then you'll be playing notes that won't always go together with the open strings that have remained unchanged. You might get some interesting sounds in some positions, but at most frets, it'll sound wrong. In order to move a C chord up, you have to move the open strings too. One way you could do this is by attaching a capo to your guitar. I'm going to put a capo at the 1st fret. Now I'll finger a C chord. So everything is moved up now, my fingers and the open strings. This is still a major chord shape, and the root is still right here under my ring finger. Although that note is no longer C, that's actually a C sharp note. So technically, this is a C sharp chord. You could play this without a capo by using your index finger and barring across the 1st fret. So your first finger is acting like a capo. Then use your remaining fingers to build the C shape. This is not easy to do. It'll take some practice in order to get used to it. I should point out that it's easier if you only hold down the necessary strings with your index finger. You don't have to bar across the whole fret actually, because the only open strings involved in a C chord shape are the 1st strings and the 3rd strings. If you focus on just barring enough to grab those 2 strings, it should make this whole bar chord a little easier to play. You should begin strumming from string 5 because that's where your root is, under your pinky. You can now move this bar chord shape around to different frets and play major chords along the 5th string. The root will always be underneath your pinky. In this position, I'm actually holding down a D with my pinky. So this is actually a D chord. The chord shape is what I refer to as a C form, but the actual chord depends on what's under your pinky. Here in this position, my pinky is on an E at the 7th fret of string 5. So this is actually an E chord. This would be F, and so on. You know, this bar chord is a bear to play, but it's important to keep in mind that it's rarely, if ever, used in its entirety. It's usually always broken up and played in pieces. This brings us to inversions and voicings. Major chords have 3 notes. These notes can occur more than once and can be combined in any order. An inversion, for practical intents and purposes, is simply a rearrangement of the notes in a chord from one shape to another. The notes are inverted, get it? Although the building blocks remain the same, changing the order in which notes are combined creates a different sound or voicing. Sometimes this is accomplished by simply not playing all of the chord shape. Let's explore some of the ways that you can change this chord shape by omitting some strings. The first thing you could do is to remove your pinky. When you do this, make sure you no longer strum the 5th string. What you're going to do is just strum the remaining strings, which are 4, 3, 2, and 1. This makes the C form bar chord a little bit easier to play. It also gives it a slightly different sound or voicing. Here's with the root D. Here's without it. This chord shape is used in the introduction to Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. And you'll probably come across other songs that use this chord shape. This shape can be moved around the fretboard, and you can always figure out what the actual chord is by just putting your pinky in place. In this position, this chord is a D because there's the root D. Even if you're not playing the root, you can still visualize it, so you can keep track of what chord you're playing. In this position, the chord is actually an E, F, and so on. Another way you can simplify this C form bar chord is to take away your pinky and your ring finger. Now you're just left with the notes on 3 strings. Make sure you only strum these 3 strings. Another way you could finger this is like this. It looks like a D chord. In fact, the D chord shape and the C chord shape are closely related in that they both share this little triangular shape here in the first 3 strings. This chord shape is used quite a bit on the guitar. Usually guitar players will move it around. When you move this chord shape around, you can visualize the entire C form bar chord. That'll help you trace this shape back to its root on the 5th string, so you can keep track of what actual chord you're playing. So in this position, I can see it's a D. I'm visualizing my root D. Here, my eye is tracing the shape back to E at the 7th fret, so I know that's an E. Here, my eye is tracing it back to the 10th fret of string 5. I know that's a G. This is an A. Another way you can simplify this whole C-form bar chord is to omit the 5th string and the 1st string. So when you do this, you're only left with these 3 notes on strings 4, 3, and 2. Make sure you only strum those strings. This particular shape goes really well with an A chord or an A-form chord. Here's an open A major. If you play this chord by barring with your index finger, which a lot of guitar players do, and when you do this, you can go ahead and just leave out the 1st string since it's difficult to get that note to ring out. When you play your A this way, you can switch to a D chord by simply adding your middle and ring finger. This is part of a C form, but remember, it's actually a D chord. There's your root D. Not only does this A and this D have different fingerings than what you might be used to in the open position, but it has a different sound as well. When you get used to this fingering, you'll find that it's actually easier to move back and forth between A and D with this fingering than it is using open chords. So an easier fingering and a new voicing. You can hear these shapes used together in the interlude to Jack and Diane by John Mellencamp. This trick of switching back and forth between an A and a C-form bar chord is used quite a bit by Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards, who would move these shapes all over the fretboard. Remember, major chords are made up of 3 notes. For example, a C chord uses the notes C, E, G, another C, and another E. There are some more notes available in this open position which can be added to a C chord. For example, here's a G note on string 1. G is part of a C chord, so you could go ahead and add that G in if you wanted to. When you add this G into a C chord, there is no new name for the chord because C already has a G in it. It's just a different voicing, but the building blocks of the chord remain the same. There's also a G at the 3rd fret on string 6. So technically you could add that note into the chord as well. The way most guitar players do it is to grab it with their ring finger and then have their pinky take over and grab the root. Now, when you add notes to a chord, if they're already part of the chord, you don't need to rename the chord, unless the note falls into the bass position. When you do this chord shape, you have to call it C/G. That means a C chord, but instead of putting C in the lowest position, you actually have a G in the lowest position. That's what it means when you have a slash in a chord name. So this is C/G. And adding the G in the bass here gives it a little deeper tonality. Here's a regular C, C/G. If you listen carefully to the beginning of the verse of Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, you can hear that they're not playing a normal C, they're actually playing a C/G. It goes on. Here's an interesting way to play C. What I've done is I've taken a normal C chord, my pinky's grabbing the extra note on string 1, and my ring finger is moving over to string 6. When I fret this note on string 6, I lean this finger back just enough to bump into the 5th string so it's muted. Here's a G, and here's this new voicing for C. You can hear this used in Take It Easy by the Eagles. Another possible note you can add to this C chord is the open 6th string, E, because E is part of a C chord as well. So you could begin strumming with the open E. Now you were probably taught not to strum the 6th string when you learn the C chord, because usually you want to put the root of the chord in the bass. When you put the E in the bass, you would call this C/E. This particular voicing does have a tendency to sound muddy. But in the right changes, it can actually sound good. These chord changes can be found in the song Plush by Stone Temple Pilots. So to review, a C chord actually has 3 other notes which could go along with the shape. You've got an extra note here on string 1. You've got an extra note here on string 6. And you have an extra note here, the open string, on string 6. Let's see what happens when we move this away from the open position and apply these extra notes to the bar chord. I'm playing a C form bar chord with my pinky at fret 5. That's a D. So this actual chord is D. Now, let's pretend that we're in the open position. There is an extra note over here on string 1 that can go together with this shape. If you wanted to add it to this shape, you'll have to remove your pinky from the root, skip that string completely, and grab that extra note with your pinky. There's also an extra note over on string 6. If you wanted to play that, you're probably going to have to skip the 5th string again. And there is also an extra note over here on string 6. You could grab this by barring completely across the fretboard. So whenever you move this bar chord around, you always have those 3 extra notes that could be factored in to your chord shape. In fact, you can combine these notes to play an arpeggio. An arpeggio is the notes of a chord played one at a time in sequence like a scale. To do this, I'm going to start with the lowest pitched note of all the chord tones in this position. And I'm going to play through each possible note in order, in sequence. So you've got the 2nd fret of string 6, 5th fret of string 6. Then you have all the notes that are in the chord, the actual bar chord shape. And and then you have this extra note on top. When you play arpeggios, you don't need to hold down all of the notes. You can just finger each note one at a time as you need it. Here's the arpeggio pattern once again. Memorize it and practice it, and then you can start moving it around the fretboard. This pattern gives you all of the notes for a D major chord in this particular position. In case you're curious, the actual notes are F sharp, A, D, F sharp, A, D, F sharp, A. Or, if you think of them by interval, they are third, fifth, root, third, fifth, root, third, fifth. Once you memorize this pattern and how to play it, you can move it around the fretboard and duplicate it in new positions. So for example, here now I have my pinky at the 5th fret of string 5, so this is an E chord, and here are all the possible notes of E major in this position. Here's an F at the 8th fret. And if I duplicate that pattern once again, I'll have all the notes of F in this possible position. Here's G at the 10th fret. And so on. With arpeggio patterns, you can map out all of the notes of a chord in a position. Then you can break up that pattern and grab the notes however you see fit to make all sorts of unique shapes and interesting voicings. We already talked about some of the different ways you can break up a C-form bar chord, but let's explore some of the additional ways you can make chord shapes with these extra notes from the arpeggio. So, you've got an extra note here on the 1st string. If you play this, you're going to have to omit the other strings. You've got an extra note on the 6th string here, and one over here. Now, there's no rules on what part of this chord you have to play. You can actually combine these notes in any way that you are able to grab them. So for example, sometimes you can even use your thumb. Sometimes you can even use notes that aren't right next to each other. Although to do this, you may have to finger pick. Here's an unusual shape that comes up in some rock songs. What's unusual about it is that it's just 2 notes, but the root is actually the higher pitched of the 2. Most guitar players make the mistake of assuming that a shape like this is some sort of F sharp chord because they're beginning their strum on the F sharp. But this particular shape is actually part of a C-form bar chord with the extra note on string 6 and omitting all strings and only playing strings 6 and 5. So the root is actually right here, D. You can make some interesting sounds by combining this shape with, like, say, a typical power chord that you'd find in rock songs. In this example, I'm playing a G at the 3rd fret, a G power chord, and then I'm switching to a D chord I'm using a C-form bar chord with the extra note, and I'm only playing that note with the root. G, D. You can hear this used in the chorus to Stay Together for the Kids by Blink-182. Sometimes guitar players will wrap their thumb around the neck and grab this note with their thumb and then use their other fingers to play some of the other chord tones. For example, your thumb can play the 6th string, and then you can use your ring finger, first finger, and your middle finger together with it. Again, you may have to finger pick in order to do this, since you have to skip some strings. So even though you're not playing the whole chord shape, and even though you don't even have this D in there, this is still part of the shape. This is still a D chord. If I moved it down 1 fret, it would be a D flat, or you could also call it C sharp. They're the same. This shape is used in the chorus to Tears in Heaven by Eric Clapton. It's kind of an unusual sounding shape on its own, but it can actually sound really nice with the right chord changes. So you can move this arpeggio pattern around to different frets, and in each position you can map out all of the possible notes for a given chord. And then you can grab those notes and come up with all sorts of unique shapes and voicings. Here I am with my pinky at the 7th fret on string 5. This is an E chord. Here are all the notes in this position. One way you could grab these notes is to play just this note on string 6, and then the note on string 3 and 2. Probably have to finger pick this. So this is still an E chord. You don't have to play the whole form. This shape is also used in Tears in Heaven by Eric Clapton. Let's move on. Now I've got my pinky up at fret 10. That's a G. Here's the common bar chord. Here's the entire arpeggio pattern. Here's another interesting way you could break up these notes. You could play just the root, string 2, and the extra note on string 1. In order to do this, you're probably going to have to rearrange your fingers. You probably have to finger pick it too. You can hear this chord shape used in Cliffs of Dover by Eric Johnson. In fact, in that song, the melody also is using a little bit of the arpeggio pattern. Arpeggio patterns can be used for playing melody or bass lines or riffs as well. Now that you know the C-form bar chord, the arpeggio pattern, and how to play different shapes and voicings, you can practice by combining all elements. First, start by playing the bar chord. Then, follow it with the whole arpeggio pattern. Then take a minute or two to break up the notes of the arpeggio into different shapes and voicings. When you complete one position, move to another position and do the same thing. For example, I'm going to start here with my pinky at the 5th fret. This is a D. I'll play the bar chord, Then I'll play the whole arpeggio pattern. You should practice playing it forward and backward. Then I'll take a minute just to experiment with some different chord shapes and voicings. Then I'll move to a new position and do it all over again. This is D sharp. Arpeggio. Some shapes and voicings. Now I'll move to a new position and do it again. And so on. You can practice this all the way up the neck. After you've practiced and you're comfortable moving the C form all over the fretboard, the next step is to learn songs. Songs will show you exactly how to put this stuff to good use. Here is a list of songs that all make use of the C form bar chord. In most of these examples, you're playing pieces of the C form bar chord, not the whole thing. Also, many of these songs have other chord forms mixed in them as well, which you'll learn coming up in the next sections. I recommend you look up and learn these songs on your own. Many of these songs are notated in tab books, which are for sale at your local music store. If you can't find songs in your local music store, there are tab books and sheet music available online for sale too. Also, there's lots of free content floating around the internet. So there's no excuse to learning songs, and it really is necessary. So it's time for you to take the next step on your own. After you've learned a couple of songs with a C form bar chord, come back to the video and we'll move to the next form. The next form in the CAGED template chord system stems from the open A chord. We're going to approach this just like we did with C. You'll learn how to turn this into a bar chord and move it around the fretboard. You'll learn an arpeggio pattern, and we'll explore how you can break the form up into different shapes and voicings. Here is the common open A chord. There's a couple different ways to finger this shape. It doesn't matter which fingering you use, they all work well. Now this is a major chord shape, and the root is on string 5. That's where the A is. When you play this shape, you should begin strumming on string 5. One way that you can move this shape around the fretboard is to attach a capo to your guitar. I've got a capo in the 2nd fret. Now I'll just duplicate the shape. This is still a major chord, and the root is still here on string 5, although that note is no longer an A, it's actually a B. Now, to play this without a capo, your index finger will have to bar in the 2nd fret, and then your remaining fingers can build the A shape. This is one way to do it. However, most guitar players, myself included, play an A-form bar chord by grabbing all 3 of these notes with the ring finger. When you do this, it's usually not possible to get this note on the 1st string to ring out clearly, so most guitar players will just skip it or mute it. This note is part of the chord shape, but you don't need it necessarily. You can just play the root and these 3 notes, and it sounds good and full. In fact, if you don't need this note, then you really don't need to bar. All you need to do is just grab the root on string 5. The barring is being done by your ring finger. This is one of the most common types of bar chords. This bar chord is used in its entirety and moved all over the neck. Here at the 2nd fret it's B, C at the 3rd, D at the 5th, E, F, G, A, and so on. The A-form bar chord is one of the most common, and it is frequently used in its entirety. I'm not going to deal with using the whole bar chord shape because that's something you should already be familiar with. Instead, let's explore some of the ways this form is broken up into different shapes and voicings. Okay, I'm playing off C at the 3rd fret. The most common way to break up this A-form bar chord is to merely play the root C and then the next string, which is a 5th interval. This creates a power chord. Sometimes guitar players will use the root, 5th, and then another octave root as well, which you can either grab with different fingers or you can just grab with your ring finger. This power chord shape, of course, is moved all over the fretboard and is extremely common in rock music. Another way that you could break this up is to just play these 3 notes right here under your ring finger. Usually, if you're just playing these notes, they're grabbed by the index finger. And this shape is frequently used together with a C-form bar chord, which you can create by adding your middle and ring finger. And of course, these shapes are moved all over the fretboard. Another way you could break this shape up is to play just strings 1, 2, and 3. Now remember, this note is supposed to be played on string 1. So if you're going to play just strings 1, 2, and 3, you should have. Like every other shape you play, even though you're not playing the whole bar chord, you can still visualize it to keep track of what chord you're actually playing. When I play this shape here, my eye is looking over here and I know it's a C. So this would be a D. I can see D right there. This is based off of an A minor form. Here's E at the 7th fret, E major, E minor. If I just play the first 3 strings, E minor, D, C. You can hear shapes like this used in Stairway to Heaven. I'm playing an F at the 8th fret, A form. Another way you could break this shape up is just to pick a couple of notes. For example, maybe you just pick the root on string 5 together with the second string. If you do this, well, then you really only need to fret the notes you're picking. Maybe you could throw this together with some other bar chords. And apply the same concept. Instead of playing all the notes of the chord, just pick a couple. That sounds quite a bit like Scar Tissue by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now, let's learn the arpeggio pattern that accompanies the A form. This pattern will introduce a couple of extra notes that you can incorporate into your chord building. I'm playing an A form C chord. Here's C at the 3rd fret. The arpeggio pattern will start at the 3rd fret of string 6. This note is not normally part of this bar chord, but this note is related to the chord. So we're going to start on string 6, 3rd fret, then you'll play the root, 3rd fret of string 5, and I'm using my middle finger because the next note in the arpeggio pattern is the 2nd fret of string 3. Then I'm going to reach up here with my ring finger and grab the 3 notes that are part of the chord, and then end on the 1st string. And that is the complete arpeggio pattern that goes along with the A form bar chord. You don't really need to know what the notes are, but if you're curious, they are G, C, E, G, C, E, G. By interval, they are 5th, root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th. Just as you can move an A form bar chord around the fretboard to produce major chords, you can duplicate this arpeggio pattern in each position as well. So here's C at the 3rd fret. Here's D at the 5th fret. Here's E at the 7th fret. This arpeggio pattern will always go along with an A form bar chord. And when you play the pattern, you can map out all of the possible notes in each position. Now let's take the extra notes from the arpeggio pattern and build some new chord shapes. I'm playing an F at the 8th fret of string 5. And what I'm going to do is reduce this just to a power chord, a root, a 5th, and then an octave root. And I'm also going to grab the 6th string. I'm going to grab that extra note on the 6th string, which is actually just a 5th. So the intervals in this chord are 5th, root, 5th, root. Technically, this chord should be called F5, 5 means power chord, slash C. F5 slash C, meaning an F power chord with a C in the bass. This trick is used quite a bit by rock players to kind of fatten up their power chords and give them a deeper tonality. So for example, without the note on string 6, and now listen when I add the 6th string in. Sounds even more dramatic when you have lots of distortion on your guitar. So this shape is moved all over the fretboard. That sounded a bit like The Wind Cries Mary by Jimi Hendrix. Now I'm at F sharp, fret 9, string 5. Let's review this arpeggio pattern again. So we already talked about how you might add in this extra note on string 6. Now let's talk about how you can add in this extra note on string 4. You could build a shape that just includes the root, this third interval, and then an octave root. You can hear this shape used in the bridge to What's My Age Again by Blink-182. Sometimes this shape is reduced to just strings 4 and 3. When you do this, your eye can still look right here to keep track of what chord you're on. Since these two notes are on strings 4 and 3, they are frequently used together with an ordinary power chord shape, and they are not too far away from a power chord shape either. So for example, I'm going to play a power chord with my index finger at the 7th fret on string 4, just a root and a 5th, that's it. This is an A. It's an octave of A at the 5th fret on string 6. So A power chord. Here's a G power chord, octave of G. And then here's a D chord. There's the root D. I'm not playing it, but this shape still stems from this shape. So A, G, D, you can hear these shapes used in All Right Now by Free. They're also used in Cold Gin by Kiss. Now you know how to make different shapes and voicings that stem from the A-form bar chord. To practice, first play the full bar chord, followed by the arpeggio pattern, then experiment with some different shapes and voicings. Then move to the next position and do it all over again. And so on up the neck. Once you've mastered the arpeggio pattern and building different shapes, I recommend you learn some of the songs that I reference, including the songs in the following list. The next form in the CAGED template chord system stems from the open G. Let's take a look at this chord in the open position, learn the bar chord, and the arpeggio pattern. Here is the common open G major chord. This is a major chord shape, and the root is under your middle finger on string 6. Some people finger the G chord like this. And sometimes you might play the G chord holding down strings 1 and 2. This is still called a G major. A G major has both a B in it and it also has a D in it. So you can add either of those notes on the second string. It's a G major either way. You can move this shape around the fretboard using a capo. Here I put a capo at the 2nd fret. Now I'll duplicate that G major shape. This is still a major chord, and the root's still right here, although technically that's not a G anymore, it's actually an A. Now to play this without the capo, you'll have to bar in the 2nd fret with your index finger, and then use your remaining fingers to build the G shape. This is a tough bar chord to do. And like many of the other CAGED forms, this bar chord is rarely, if ever, used in its entirety. But this is a major chord shape, and the root is right here. That's an A at the 5th fret. Here's a B at the 7th fret. Here's a C at the 8th fret, and so on. Now let's take a look at the G form arpeggio pattern. The G form is almost a complete arpeggio in itself. We just need to add one note in order to complete it. I'm going to start here with at the 5th fret of string 6. 5th fret string 6, 4th fret string 5, then 2nd fret, 2nd fret, 2nd fret. Here's the extra note we have to add in. It would be the 5th fret of string 2. This is that extra note that you can sometimes add in the open position as well when you finger like this. 5th fret string 1. You don't need to know the notes, but if you're curious, they are A, C sharp, E, A, C sharp, E, A. Or by interval, root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th, root. And you can duplicate this pattern at other frets and map out all of the notes in each position. Here's a B, 7th fret string 6. There's a G form B major chord. Here are all the notes of B in this position. Here's C at the 8th fret, and so on. Now let's break this arpeggio pattern up into different shapes and voicings. To begin with, let's look at some of the ways G is usually broken up in the open position. It's very common, especially in acoustic guitar songs, to play a chord called G/B. And what this is a G, but instead of strumming from the root G on string 6, you skip that string and you begin strumming from the B on string 5. And you can do it, in all sorts of ways. Of course, you could just have 2 notes here that you fret, or you can grab both of these notes on strings 1 and 2. Or sometimes you leave out the 6th string and the 1st string, so you're left with just Remember that whenever you take out the root, or whenever you put something other than the root in the lowest position, technically you're supposed to specify that with a slash. That's why this would be called G/B. It's a G chord, but we're putting B in the lowest position, not G. This chord shape is frequently used between a C and some form of A minor, because this B makes a perfect stepping stone between the root C and A. You can hear this used in Landslide by Fleetwood Mac. You can hear it in Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. You can hear it in Dust in the Wind by Kansas. You can hear it in Blackbird by the Beatles. And many other songs. Here's what that same G shape looks like when played in a higher position. Here's F, 13th fret, string 6. You could put your ring finger on that and try to play the whole G form bar chord. Or you can take away the 6th string, take away the 1st string, and in this case also take away the 2nd string, and you're left with just... Even though you're not playing the whole shape, your eye can still look here to keep track of what chord you're playing. This shape was used quite a bit by Jimi Hendrix, who would move it all around the neck. He also would bar up to the 5th string and hammer this note down like this. You can hear this shape used in The Wind Cries Mary. Here's another example of how you might break up a G form bar chord. Rather than trying to play the whole thing, if you leave the 1st string out, you can finger it like this, which might be a little easier, and you can get almost all of the notes. I'm playing an G form A. A is at the 5th fret of string 6. This would be B, and so on. You can hear this fingering used in Fade to Black by Metallica. One more way you might break up this G form is to play just strings 1 through 4. So for example, here's C at the 8th fret of string 6. I'm going to put my ring finger on that and play the whole G form bar chord for a second. I can leave out string 6 and leave out string 5 and just fret and just strum strings 1 through 4. Remember, even though you're not doing the whole shape, your eye can still look here to keep track of what chord you're on. This is a C, and you can hear this shape used in the intro to Stairway to Heaven. Now you know the G form bar chord, arpeggio pattern, and different shapes and voicings. To practice, play a little bit of the bar chord, followed by the arpeggio pattern, and then break it up and play some different shapes and voicings. Then move to the next position and do it all over again. and so on up the fretboard. Once you're completely comfortable with the G form, I recommend you learn some of the songs that I referenced in this section. Also, look up and learn some of the songs in the following list. The next form in the CAGED template chord system stems from the open E chord. Let's take a look at it in the open position, turn it into a bar chord, and learn the arpeggio pattern. So here's the common open E chord. This is a major chord shape, and the root is on string 6. It's the open E. That's where you begin strumming. One way you could move this shape up is to put a capo on your guitar. Got a capo at the first fret. Then just duplicate the fingering in this new position. This is still a major chord, and the root is still on string 6, although this is no longer E, it's now an F. So to play this without the capo, you have to bar with your index finger, then use your remaining fingers to build the E shape. Major chord, and the root is right here on string 6 under your index finger. In this position, the chord is actually an F. And of course, you can move this anywhere. Here's G at the 3rd fret, A at the 5th fret, B at the 7th fret, and so on. The E form bar chord is one of the most widely used, and it's used in its entirety all the time. I'm not going to get into the details of using this whole bar chord because it's something you should already be familiar with. Instead, let's explore some of the ways you can break this shape up. The most common way to break up an E form bar chord is to only play strings 1 through 4. When you do this, you only need to fret those notes. And you're left with the shape that you probably learned along with your basic open chords, F. This F shape is actually just a partial E form bar chord. Whenever you play a quote-unquote F shape like this, you can always look over to the 6th string to figure out what chord you're actually playing. And of course, this shape can be moved all over the fretboard. Now I'm all the way up at fret 12. This is an E form E chord. You can reduce this partial form to just 3 notes and play just strings 1, 2, and 3. Again, even though you're not playing the whole bar chord, when you play a little shape like this, your eye can still follow along string 6 to keep track of what chord you're playing. You can hear shapes like this used in Gloria by Van Morrison. Now I'm at B flat, fret 6, string 5. Another way you could break this form up is to only play the notes that your fingers are on here. In other words, skip all the notes that are part of the bar. When you do this, make sure you only strum these notes. Since you don't have to bar, you could use other fingers for these notes if you wanted. You can hear this chord voicing used in the intro to Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry. Sometimes you can make a chord shape that uses notes on non-adjacent strings. So for example, I'm playing a G and an A at frets 3 and 5. And I'm going to grab and play only strings 6 and 3. You can even strum across this if you know how to mute with your left hand. So instead of playing the whole bar chord, you can hear shapes like this used by Dave Matthews. In fact, he uses them quite a bit, including in the song Tripping Billies. Now let's learn the full E-form arpeggio pattern. I'm playing a G at the 3rd fret on string 6. Here's what the arpeggio pattern looks like. So let me walk you through this. You've got 3rd fret of string 6, 2nd fret of string 5, and then the rest of the notes are just the notes in the bar chord. Backward. You don't really need to know the notes, but if you're curious, they are G, B, D, G, B, D, G. Or by interval, root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, 5th, root. Once you get this arpeggio pattern memorized, you can duplicate it in other positions and map out all the notes of each chord along the way. Here's A at the 5th fret. Here's all the notes of A in this position. Here's B at the 7th fret. C. And so on up the neck. Now let's take that extra note from the arpeggio pattern and use it to build some new chord shapes. I'm playing an A at the 5th fret of string 6. I'm going to give you another Dave Matthews example. I showed you before how Dave Matthews likes to play just the notes on string 6 and string 3 of an E-form bar chord. Sometimes he will also add in the extra note from the arpeggio here on string 5, like this. Root, 3rd, and then the octave 3rd. Again, to strum across this, you're going to have to lean your fingers back slightly and mute the unwanted strings. So this is an interesting voicing for A, and you can move this along the 6th string and use this voicing on other chords too. Here's a D at the 10th fret. So if you're a Dave Matthews fan, you'll definitely hear shapes like this used by him. I'm playing a B at the 7th fret on string 6. Here's another way you can break this arpeggio pattern up. You can grab just this note on string 5 and then the octave root. Remember, root, 3rd, 5th, root. So this is root, 3rd, 5th, root, 3rd, root. Even though you're not playing the whole shape, your eye can still look at the B here to keep track of what you're on. This shape is frequently used together with a power chord shape on string 5. So for example, if you were playing an E and a B, you could do something like this. You can hear this shape used in the bridge to Never Let You Go by Third Eye Blind. Here's a trick that I love. It involves taking the notes from the E form that aren't played with the bar and moving them around the fretboard along with some open strings. You can begin in the open position. This is an E major chord. Then you can go to A at the 5th fret, but rather than barring, take the bar off completely, but strum all the chords, including the open strings. Then you can go to B at the 7th fret, and again, remove the bar and strum all the strings, including the open ones. You could even duplicate this up at fret 12. This would be E again. Take the bar away. Listen to how great this sounds when I mix it up and move it around. You can hear chords played like this in the song We Just Disagree by Billy Dean. Now you know the E form bar chord and arpeggio pattern, and you know how to break them up to create new shapes and voicings. Practice this shape just like you did the other forms. First, play a little bit of the bar chord, then play the full arpeggio, then take a moment to play some different shapes and voicings. Then move to the next position and do it all over again. And so on up the neck. Once you feel comfortable using the E form, I recommend you look up and learn some of the songs that I referenced in this section, including the songs in the following list. The next form in the CAGED template chord system stems from the open D chord. Let's take a look at this chord, learn the bar and the arpeggio pattern. Okay, here's the open D chord. And I'm going to change this up a bit. We're actually going to use a D/F sharp, the D form. So you play a regular D, and then you add in an F sharp, the second fret of string 6, you can either grab it with your thumb, or you could omit the first string from the D shape, and this will free up your index finger to grab the F sharp. This is a major chord shape, and the root is on string 4. That's D. And we're still going to use that as our guide even when we're adding in the F sharp. Now, you could move this around the fretboard by putting a capo on the guitar. I've got a capo at the second fret, so here's the D shape, D/F sharp, or, and you can play this without the capo by barring in the second fret, then using your remaining fingers to build a D shape. You could do it like this, or here's the D/F sharp, which is the shape I'm going to use. So this will represent the D form. The D form bar chord is the most unusual shape in the whole CAGED template chord system. It's a little hard to track because the root lies on string 4, and most guitar players, myself included, prefer to use strings 6 and 5 to track the notes of the chords. So what you'll probably have to do is trace the root back to string 6. You can do this using octave shapes. Here's the root. Here it is an octave lower. That's an F. Here's the root at string fret 5. Here it is an octave lower. That's a G. While this shape is a bit unusual, it still actually can be used in its entirety. Let me give you some examples. I'm going to play an open E, and then an A at the 5th fret, E form. This is a 1/4 chord change, if you're familiar with playing by numbers. This D form makes a great stepping stone between the E and the A. So here's an example of how you might use the whole form. Instead of just playing a chord change like this, you can play half the E on this form and half of it on this form. And this alternate bass note is a great leading tone to bring you into A. Could even bring it back. This sounds very much like Stuck in the Moment by U2. You can also hear a sound like this in I Saw Her Standing There by the Beatles. Sometimes players might play around this chord shape without actually using the whole thing. For example, that sounds an awful lot like Crash Into Me by Dave Matthews. You can also hear this shape used in Spirit of Radio by Rush. Now let's explore some of the ways you can break this form down into smaller shapes. Okay, I'm playing the D form with my index finger at the 3rd fret. Here's the root on string 4. That's an F. If you don't know the notes on string 4, you'll have to trace it back an octave to string 6. There's F, F an octave higher. So this is an F. The most common way the D form is broken up is to play just a power chord. This would include the root F and then a fifth interval, or maybe even the second string as well. You can hear this used in the intro to All the Small Things by Blink-182. Anytime you play a power chord with the root on string 4, it's actually part of the D form. I mentioned earlier that this little triangular D shape is both part of a C form and a D form. Both forms share this little shape. So for example, if you're moving this shape around the fretboard, you could trace it back to the 5th string using the C form, or the same notes are part of the D form as well. So you could trace it back to string 4 and then probably back to string 6. So the shape is in both forms. Personally, when I'm using this shape, I usually visualize the C form because I know the notes better on string 5, and it's just easier for me to trace it back to string 5. But the notes are in both forms. So for example, I mentioned the song Tears in Heaven by Eric Clapton earlier. It uses an A, then it goes to an E like this, then an F sharp, like that. You could think of this E as being part of a C form, or the D form. Now let's learn the entire D form arpeggio pattern. My index fingers are the 3rd fret, so I'm playing an F. Here's F, F. Here's how the arpeggio pattern is played. Let me walk you through this. You get the 5th fret of string 6, next 3rd fret string 5, 3rd fret string 4, 2nd fret string 3, 5th fret string 3, 6th fret string 2, 5th fret string 1. You don't need to know the notes, but if you're curious, they are A, C, F, A, C, F, A, or by interval, 3rd, 5th, root 3rd, 5th, root 3rd. You know, I have to admit, I don't use the arpeggio pattern much. And there aren't really any other voicings or shapes that use that extra note from the arpeggio pattern. Still, not a bad thing to learn, as it does complete the whole CAGED system. To practice, play the bar chord, play a little bit of the arpeggio, then take a moment to break up the shape into different voicings. Then move to the next position and do it all over again. And so on up the neck. Once you're comfortable with the D form, look up and learn some of the songs that I referenced in this section. Also look up and learn some of the songs in the following list. Now that you've learned all 5 caged forms, let me show you how they connect to cover the whole fretboard. I'm going to begin with an open C, and here's the root C at the 3rd fret, and this is a C form C. If you put your index finger on that root C, the next form is A. There's an A form bar chord. So the C form and the A form connect in this way. Now, in this A form bar chord, your ring finger is grabbing 3 strings here. Replace those notes with your index finger. Now you're in position to build a G form. If you do this correctly, your ring finger should be at the 8th fret of string 6. There's your root C. So the A form and the G form share these notes and connect in this way. Let me go back to the beginning. The C form connects into the A form. The A form connects into the G form. Here's the root C. Now remember, these are all C chords. They're just different forms. Here's the root C, 8th fret, string 6. Put your index finger on that and play the E form. The G form connects to the E form in this way. And notice that these forms are connecting in the same order that you spell the word caged. C, A, G, E. The next form is D, and this is how you'll get there. Here's the root C on string 6. Here it is an octave higher on string 4. Put your index finger on that note, make a little power chord shape, and then you can put together the rest of the D form. So E form, connects to the D form. C, A, G, E, D. When you get this down, try connecting them backward as well. D goes back into the E form. D connects back into the G form. G connects back into the A form. A connects back into the C form. Remember, these are all C chords. You're just playing different forms in different positions. But they really connect to make one big giant chord pattern that covers the whole fretboard. Once you get used to connecting the forms in C, practice playing in other keys. For example, you could begin on the open A, an open G, an open E, an open D, etc. Okay, now I'm going to start with an open A chord. Play your A by barring with your index finger. The A form always connects to the G form. A form, G form. And here's your root A, 5th fret, string 6. Put your index finger on that. The G form connects to the E form. A, here's your octave root A. Put your index finger on that, make a power chord shape, and you can piece together the D form. The E form always connects to the D form. Now, if you take these two notes from the D form and replace them with your first two fingers, you're in position to build the C form. And there's your root A, 12th fret, string 5. So, the D form connects to the C form. A, G form, E form, D form, C form. And the C form connects to the A form. And so on until you run out of frets or you can't play any higher. Now I'm going to start with an open G chord. This is a G form G chord. Here's the root G. The G form always connects to the E form. Here's your root G. Here's your octave root G. Put your index on that. You can build the D form. The E form always connects to the D form. The D form connects to the C form. Replace these two notes from the D form with your first two fingers and you're in position to build the C form. And there's G, 10th fret, string 5. So G form, E form, D form, C form. The C form connects to the A form. And the A form connects to the G form. And so on up the neck. Now I'm starting with an open E chord. This is an E form E chord. Here's the root E. Here's an octave root E. If you put your index finger on that, you're in position to build the D form. The E form always connects to the D form. And the D form connects to the C form. And there's E, 7th fret, string 5. So E form, D form, C form. The C form connects to the A form. The A form connects to the G form. Here's your root E at the 12th fret of string 6, and the G form connects into the E form, which connects into the D form, and so on until you either run out of frets or you can't play any higher. Now I'm starting on the open D chord. So the D form connects to the C form. And notice how both forms have this little triangular shape. The C form connects to the A form. The A form connects to the G form. The G form connects to the E form. The E form connects to the D form. D into C, and so on. Once you're comfortable connecting the forms forward and backward, you can really start on any form in any position. and just connect. Also, you can spend a little bit more time in each position and play the arpeggio pattern and some of the different shapes and voicings you've learned. For example, I'm going to start on a G chord. This is an E form G chord. So I might play a little bit of the bar chord, a little bit of the arpeggio pattern, break it up into different shapes. Now move to the next position. E form connects to the D form. Here's the arpeggio. Here's some different shapes. D form connects to the C form. Here's the arpeggio. Different shapes and voicings. And so on. By the way, as you practice this way, some arpeggios can't be completed in the open position. Just play what you can and move to the next position. Congratulations! You've just completed the CAGED template chord system. With your new knowledge, you can now play any major chord anywhere on the fretboard. Any shape, any voicing. I made lots of references to popular songs throughout this video. I highly recommend that you look up and learn some of these examples on your own. They'll teach you exactly how to put all this new information to good use. Another thing you can do is to take a familiar song or chord progression and rework it with the new forms. Let me give you an example of one way you could do this. Here's a common chord progression. This is 1-4-1-5 in the key of G. And it's very similar to many of popular songs, including Brown-Eyed Girl by Van Morrison. Now let's explore how you could play this in other positions using some of the new forms you've learned. You could play the G as an E form, play the C as an A form, and then rather than going to D back here, or rather than jumping up to D up here, you could play it right in the same position as a C form. In addition, you could break these shapes up and create little exercises for yourself. For example, maybe you only play the first few strings of each shape. In fact, there's lots of different possible ways to break this up. Just experiment with everything you've learned about these shapes. Now let's move this same progression to a new position. You could play G here as a D form bar chord. So here's your G. Here's a C in the same position as a G form bar chord. Here's a D in in this position as an A-form bar chord. And of course you can break this up into all different sorts of ways as well. Let's keep going. You can play the G as a C-form bar chord in the next position. Here's G. Here's C, an E form. So you've got G, C, G. Here's a D, same position as a G form bar chord. Let's keep going. Here's G in the next position as an A-form bar chord. G, the closest C is right here as a D form, and the closest D is right here as an E form. Who says that G, C, and D have to be simple and boring? With the CAGED template chord system, you can play that chord progression all over the fretboard using different shapes and voicings to create some pretty neat sounds. You'll be surprised how you can pump new life into old songs and old progressions. And I bet that your friends and your bandmates will think you sound like a real pro. The information in this video is based on my book, Fretboard Theory, Chapter 3. Fretboard Theory is a complete course in guitar theory, including scales, chords, chord progressions, modes, intervals, and more. So if you're interested in learning more about how the fretboard works, I recommend you pick up a copy. Also at my website, I've got other resources for sale, including Guitar Tab and other videos. If you're a visitor or customer of my website, make sure you stay on my mailing list, because I'll keep you posted on new products and free materials. Also, feel free to email me any comments or questions you may have. I would love to have a testimonial from you, and I'm always happy to answer questions. So happy jamming, and play until your fingers bleed. Let's tune up. Here's string 6, E. String 5, A. String 4, D. String 3, G. String 2, B. And string 1, E. In this quick review, you're going to learn some tips and tricks for remembering the notes along string 6 and string 5. Since most of the chord shapes and scale patterns that you play on the guitar originate from these two strings, you really ought to know the notes on them. Let's start with the open 6th string. Most people know this as E. If you don't, think about it as being the root of the common open E chord. You begin strumming on string 6, because that's your root. The chord is called E because the root is E. You ought to know that the 3rd fret is G because it's the root of the common open G chord. Here's your G. You ought to know that the 5th fret is A because it matches the 5th string open A. Those are the same notes. That's why the 5th fret is used for relative tuning. So right off the bat, you ought to know that you've got E open, G at the 3rd fret, and A at the 5th fret. Now let's go in and fill in some of the spaces. F is a common chord. And maybe you didn't know that this version of F is really just a shorter form of a full bar chord. And here's your root F right here in the first fret. When you play a full bar chord F, you bar in the 1st fret. That's where F is on string 6. So you've got E, F, G, A. From here, the alphabet starts over. A, B, C. B and C are right next to each other. So E, F, G, A, B, C. You ought to know that the double dot, the 12th fret, is E again, exactly 1 octave higher than the same string open. So you've got A, B, C, E at the double dot, and D right in between. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. And then all the notes repeat from the 12th fret on as they did from the open string on. In other words, this first dot here after the open string is G, so this first dot here after the 12th fret is G, next dot is A, next dot is A, etc. I recommend you go through and quiz yourself on the notes in both directions. For example, and call them out as you go. E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, and then try it backward. E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E. Remember, there's no space between E and F, and there's no space between B and C. That occurs on all strings, that occurs on all instruments. Once you have these notes memorized, come back to the video and we'll memorize the notes on string 5. Okay, let's go through and learn the notes on string 5. The 5th string open is A. It's the root of the common open A chord. When you play an A chord, you should begin strumming on string 5. That's where your root is. The 2nd fret is the root of the somewhat common B7 chord. So that'll help you remember that that note is B. The 3rd fret is C. It's the root of the common open C chord. It's your root C. The 5th fret is D, and it matches the 4th string open. That's why the 5th fret is used for relative tuning. So if you're already familiar with relative tuning and basic chords, you should really already know the notes along the 5th string, at least this far. A, B, C, D. E is at the 7th fret. E and F are right next to each other, always. E, F, G at the 10th fret. And when you get to the double dot, you're 1 octave higher than you started. We began on the open 5th string A. That's A at the double dot again. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. You should go through and memorize these notes and quiz yourself on them. Don't forget to try to move backward as well. A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A. You can figure out the notes on other strings by using octave shapes. Let me show you what I mean. 3rd fret of string 6 is G. If you hold this note and then reach over 2 strings up 2 frets, that's G in the next octave. Both those notes are G. So, the 5th fret of string 4 is G. And you can use this octave shape to trace any note from string 4 back to the 6th string. So for example, if you wanted to know what the 7th fret of string 4 is, just use the octave shape, trace it back to the 6th string. Oh, that's A. So that's A, that's A, B, B, C, C, etc. You can do the same thing with your index finger on string 5. Here's C at the 3rd fret. If I reach over 2 strings up 2 frets, there's C an octave higher. So you can figure out the notes on string 3 by tracing it back to string 5. C, C, D, D, etc. If you want to figure out a note on string 2, you're going to have to trace it back a couple different ways. For example, let's say you want to figure out what the note is at the 6th fret of string 2. Well, this octave shape is not going to work because of the way the guitar is tuned. You actually have to reach an additional fret. This note on string 2 is identical to this note. Well, is the same note. They're not identical. They're different octaves. And this note is F. So here's F, F an octave higher, F, F an octave higher. You can do that for string 1 as well. For example, here's C on string 5, C an octave higher, that's C, there's C an octave. Notice I have to reach up an extra fret there. You can figure out the notes on string 1 easily because string 1 is tuned to E just like the 6th string, so all the notes are the same. E, F, these are both G's, A's, B's, etc. Okay, once you know the notes on strings 6 and 5, once you know where the natural notes are, you can fill in the blanks with sharps and flats. So for example, here's an F at the 1st fret, here's a G at the 3rd fret. This note in between is either called F sharp, meaning 1 higher than F, or G flat, meaning 1 lower than G, etc. So all the frets in between the notes will either be sharp or flat, depending on what notes you're on. If you're on string 5, here's C, here's D. This is C sharp, or you could call it D flat.